Hello and welcome to Headliners, your first look at Tuesday's newspapers. I'm Simon Evans. Tonight I am joined by comedians Stephen Allen and Nick Initialist Dixon. How are you both?
Pretty good, thanks, yeah.
Anything you want to say?
Feeling a little under the weather, but I'm here because I don't work for the government.
No.
So you just have to come in.
You're going to die in the saddle, aren't you, Nick?
Yeah.
Days. Whereas
That
Steve,
sounded more sexual.
You look well because you've had paternity leave.
Yeah, and there's nothing more restful than having a month-old child at home. So yeah.
Squalling and bawling.
I do a bit of that. I do a lot of crying.
And that's
I've got to say, you look well on it. You do.
Oh, thank you.
You look well rested. I guess that's the makeup department. Let's take a look at those front pages. The Times kick off. I'm proof that Britain isn't racist, says Sunak. And there is J-Lo looking like a giga-chad. Telegraph, army wives force MOD U-turn over housing, and a Radio 4 presenter. Not sure what that story is. Guardian, experts warn Hunt over dubious case for unfunded budget tax cuts. Man pictured looking for tax cuts. Financial Times, Sweden clears last hurdle to join NATO as Putin's war shifts alliance borders. And the iNews, Hunt has 6 days to find tax cuts to save Tory MPs. Finally, the Daily Star, sing for your supper. Hopefully we will get onto that. Those were your front pages. So we start with the Times, Steve.
Yep, headline is, I'm proof that Britain isn't racist. Not my words, the words of Rishi Sunak, who's proved... Well, it says here he wants to take the heat out of the row over Islamophobia. Well, as a well-known Islamist, wait a minute, maybe there's a bit of gap in the logic on this one. But, I mean, he's done well for himself. Both financially, both in terms of the career and marriedly. But I suppose it makes us circle back over to the class issue. If you've got a lot of money, you go to a good school, you can do well in this country. So maybe the problems are actually more about how poor people have to struggle.
I wrote at some length about this, and to be honest, I was disappointed that I didn't manage to perceptively shift the national conversation. But a couple of years ago, yes, when to see To Kill a Mockingbird, and there was an attempt in the programme to tie that story to the death of George Floyd, which had happened about 6 months earlier. And I was just annoyed with it because exactly for what you say, the dividing lines in this country always boil down to money. It used to be class which was distinguishable from money, of course, to an extent. You could be a financially distressed aristocrat and still have a higher social standing than a well-off, nouveau riche or whatever.
That's probably still true, but
yes,
the nouveau riche are doing pretty well for themselves now.
Absolutely. You can insulate yourself from the worst of it, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, that's not the main thing I took from this. This is about Rishi Sunak, trying to sort of quell the fires of this Lee Anderson issue by talking about racism and saying, we're not a racist country and so on. And Sadiq Khan has just come out and done a bit on Channel 4. He's saying there's no firm condemnation of this from the Prime Minister. So he's obsessed with getting this apology that Lee Anderson says he won't give. And Sunak's just sort of in the middle talking about racism. Even that statement he released in the second paragraph, he was already talking about racism. Never used the word Islam or Islamic, even though MPs have been threatened. He talked about terror. He talked about extremism. Then he said, I'm proof that this country is not racist, and all this kind of stuff. It's this weird kind of
people, and the feeling is, we coined a phrase actually on Twitter recently, me and a small gang in a DM chat, which is escape squirrel, yes, as in scapegoat, but it's like trying to find a distraction on which to focus. And the idea that, of course, Lee Anderson presents a greater threat to national security, peace and calm on the streets than what we've actually seen for the last goodness knows how many Saturdays and being projected onto the side of the Houses of Parliament and so on is a classic example of that.
I'm not sure if we're also covering it later in the show, may as well say it now. Lee Anderson, this thing about whether he apologised or not, he put out this initial statement on X, so it's confusing to me, where it went, Lee Anderson MP said, even though it was on Lee Anderson's X account, following a call with the Chief Whip, blah, 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 and it ended by saying, I fully accept they had no option but to suspend the whip. However, I'll continue to support the government's efforts to call out extremism in all forms, be that anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. So there he seemed to give into this notion of Islamophobia, but tonight on GBNews, he's just clearly said he doesn't understand the term Islamophobia. It's a blasphemy law, and it should be separate from this, you know, it's to separate race and religion, which is what Khan is trying to not
Absolutely. It is ridiculous, obviously, to claim that any criticism of Islam is racist. There are, apart from anything else, something like 2 billion Muslims around the world now who are absolutely, literally, of very distinct races. Indonesia is Muslim, and they have no kinship, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying you could sometimes
Muslims
you
in
use
China.
these things. Of course, the trouble is with anti-Semitism, that traditionally is a murky area insofar as the Nazis were not interested whether you were a practising Jew, it was whether you
or
were
racially.
of Jewish
Yeah, exactly.
racial. Yeah.
So it's not the same. And this attempt to conflate them is very dangerous. Khan keeps doing it. Christopher Hitchens said years ago in this video that I've shared on X that's sort of gone viral again, he said, you know, they'll introduce this word as if it's an accusation of race, hate or bigotry, rather than merely the objection to the preachings of a very extreme and absolutist religion. That doesn't mean you have to agree with what he said about Islam, but you do have to agree, if you're a good faith actor, that it is not racism.
Correct. I absolutely agree. That's that one tied up neatly. Hopefully we won't hear any more of that nonsense. Tuesday's Telegraph, Nick.
Yeah, so the Telegraph have army wives force MOD U-turn over housing. And the great news here is that we've had an instrumental part of this. We covered this story the other night, and I feel like we made a difference, but mainly it was the wives. So what happened is the army introduced this terrible idea that you will get accommodation based on the size of your family rather than rank. And so this was always, it was a more meritocratic thing. You got your rank, you earned the rank, and you earned the slightly bigger house. And this is all good. This is the British way. But they tried to get rid of this, and everyone, incredibly unpopular, so unpopular that the wives have said, no, we're not doing it, and it's actually being reversed. And so...
The wives have forced through the non-egalitarian. That's amazing. Could this be the dawn of a bright new era?
Because they want a bigger house. It's the one thing they like more than egalitarianism.
But it's, I mean, it is interesting, isn't it? Because 100 years ago, that would have never, that would have just been self-evidently nonsense. Even 60 years ago, it is kind of what the welfare state has delivered, though, right? In a way, I mean, not within the army, but the idea that essentially you get a larger house depending on how many kids.
Perverse incentive. Yeah.
Which, you know, arguably, well, if not a perverse incentive, it's certainly, let's say, a new and untested one.
But there must still be, even though the stories say they're going back to rank, it must also still include the size of the family, because there is no way, if you just look at rank, you could, in theory, have a 7-child family in a 2-bed house.
Yeah.
Something would be done to notice.
You would hope that not mere size.
There are just colonels in cavernous mansions.
But you would hope, other than size, there would be other, you know, quality of fixtures and fittings, I suppose, or availability of staff, or possibly a south-facing garden. I don't know. There's all sorts of ways you can tweak it, aren't there, to make it more appealing.
And also, these are army wives. They probably want a good acoustics for all that singing they do.
Yes, that's true. I seem to remember Brown and Blair swapped houses, didn't they, when they were on Downing Street, just on family size. Anyway, The Guardian, Steve, Labour is tackling misogyny now.
Yeah, misogyny in schools. Labour plan to battle misogyny in schools. Probably easier there, I imagine. Well, it says here, though, that they want to help schools train young male influencers to counter the negative impact of people such as Andrew Tate. The story, it makes it look as though they're going to have a go at young boys for being misogynist. The solution here is to stop being so mean to young boys. It's the opposite. Stop creating a vacuum into which an Andrew Tate can fit in there. If you are taught the narrative that all masculinity is toxicity, then why not go with someone who says being toxic is good? Whereas if you actually get taught the message that you aren't inherently toxic, then you don't have. You could actually be a good version of a man.
On the other hand, Nick will say that Andrew Tate is good either way and doesn't require some kind of dysfunctional schooling to create a.
I need to even come in. I wasn't feeling that well. I should have stayed at home. You can just do my bit for me. Yeah, it's completely absurd. I mean, this is the idea that Labour. We all know Labour is going to be a hellish new level of social engineering, and they're focusing on this absolute nonsense. Putting in little influences in schools to combat Tate misogyny. It's complete madness. It's just a glimpse of how depressing Labour's going to be.
But we do know, don't we? Statistically speaking, it's been established for maybe 50 years now that there's been a huge decline in male role models, in a male presence, adult male presence in schools, especially infant schools. I mean, I remember even I went to a state JMA school from, 71 to 76 or something, and, you know, there was one male teacher and about 12 female teachers of various ages, you know, and I don't remember thinking it was weird. It seemed to me kind of normal, you know, that women were looking after small children, but as you reach the age of sort of 10 or 11, you started to think, wouldn't mind if there was a bloke here, You know,
what they could be doing is, I thought you were going to say this, that, you know, poor white boys are the least likely demographic to go to university. They could be focusing on how to work with them and improve that, rather than saying, oh, you're misogynist because you've watched a tape.
Or at least get them into Sandhurst, which is going to be a more urgent priority. Finally, ending with the Daily Star. Let's understand this before we move on, at least.
Yeah, it's sing for your supper. I'm not going to promise you complete understanding, but it's boffin again. You know,
Boffins.
The Star likes a boffin. Boffin reveals we should serenade our food. So a celebrity health guru, unnamed at least on the front page, says we need to sing to our food to improve well-being, and we should eat pudding before dinner. Was this Lewis Schaefer? This sounds mad, just like mad dietary stuff.
Terrible idea. Pudding before dinner. No, that's
and
terrible.
Sing to it.
That will give you a blood sugar spike. You need to line your stuff.
It'll certainly rid you of any annoying social contacts if you're going around eating your pudding first and singing to it.
And there's the song "Can't Go Back to Savoury Now." So if you open,
John Shuttleworth.
Yeah, if you open with pudding, that's it. You're done.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I like the way you're both saying pudding, though. That's good. That's Mitford you speak. That is. Dessert is nouveau. We're back to class. That's the front pages dealt with. In the second part, we dig a little deeper. Is Paul Scully Islamophobic? Is the English Channel? We'll see in a couple of moments. Thank you.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat. Yeah. Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to Headliners with me, Simon Evans, still with comedians Stephen Allen and Nick Dixon, taking a look at tomorrow's newspapers. So, Steve, GB News continue to set the agenda and lead the conversation. And The Guardian are once again reduced to reporting on its aftermath.
Yeah, Lee Anderson, you might have seen him in the canteen, stands by attack on Sadiq Khan and launches fresh broadside, is the way they phrased it, so not getting that whip back. He definitely says some true things here, that when you think you are right, you should never apologise. It would be a sign of weakness. He also says if you think you're wrong, you should apologise. He spoke of his frustration about what's happening in London. That's definitely his decision to have. But the fact that he says he thinks his wording was clumsy, you could whip up a little apology for not being less clumsy. A small amount of humble pie, like 30p's worth.
Yeah.
And then, so I think he made an error by focusing the story in the wrong area. Even Suella managed to phrase things better, saying the Islamists and extremists and anti-Semites are now in charge. Such a vague target.
But let me just say this. The scape squirrel would have been found. The hunt for the scape squirrel was of such a magnitude and intensity that a scape squirrel would have been identified and brought to bay, and that would have happened. And it turned out that Lee Anderson made it a fairly easy capture. But actually, I think what he's done in the aftermath, and I think you agree, Nick, is he's actually handled it quite skillfully. I think people do actually underestimate him a little bit because he presents as a fairly sort of, you know, I don't know, like a fairly straight-speaking, not particularly sophisticated. But actually what he's done is he's held the focus and then shifted the messaging slightly. So rather than just going, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that, and I terribly apologise, and I'm going to scuttle off to my, you know, rural abode now and nurse my wounds, he's actually sort of, he's modifying his message within the space that's been created.
Yeah, as I said before, all I didn't like was that initial strange X-post where he seemed to accede to the idea that Islamophobia and anti-Semitism are the same thing. But since then, he's been very clear and he hasn't done that.
Yeah.
And he has been clear and he said, no, I'm not apologising while I've got breath in my body, he even said tonight. And he said, when's Khan going to condemn the extremist threats against MPs? When's Khan going to condemn the projection from the river to the sea on Big Ben or whatever it was, or Parliament, whatever it was? And Khan hasn't condemned those, and that's right to point out. So you've got to stop playing their game. And you can't... It's not like me apologising to you, Sam, if I've annoyed you backstage or something. This is politics. You can't apologise to people like Sadiq Khan because they're not good faith actors. And nor is there any impartial third party looking on, adjudicating the whole thing, going, oh, he was right to apologise. It's just war. It's a culture war.
I absolutely agree with you. If he had apologised, Khan would have gone, in which case you should be thrown out of the party, or, you know, and let's see the whole thing. Yeah.
He's saying, where's the condemnation gone?
But then you want a squirrel part two. The point is that we never should have had this particular squirrel in the first place. It is so true to say, where's Khan's condemnation of these things? Yeah. You don't make that happen by making him out to be some sort of Manchurian candidate.
No, that's true. However, it is reasonable to say these marches have happened week after week. They've become more and more dominant, or you know, they've gained in confidence. We've seen a very controversial slogan being projected onto the side of the Houses of Parliament. We've seen Tower Bridge captured and so on. And there's essentially what you're seeing is the manifestation of something. So what exactly is it?
Yeah.
You know, and that's a reasonable way of bringing that to the conversation, right?
And one last point here. It shows the distinction between Anderson and the Tories, which is why there's already rumours about him joining Reform, because the Tories have proved they're not able to meet this task. They just want to... They are just the same as Labour. Yeah. They want to be wet and play along with Sadiq Khan because they're the same people. I'm
afraid you're right. Continuing with the Is Britain plunging into a medieval Arabian Nights Tale theme, Nick? And the question of no-go zones in the Telegraph.
Yeah, we're very much on the same theme of the escape squirrel, as I'm calling it. So it's Tory MP claims Birmingham and London have no-go areas amid Islamophobia row, and this is Paul Scully, who ran to be Conservatives' London mayoral candidate, and this was on BBC London, and he said, if you look at parts of Tower Hamlets, there are no-go areas, parts of Birmingham Sparkhill, where there are no-go areas, mainly because of doctrine, because of people abusing in many ways their religion, meaning Islam. So he's saying they're abusing it, but they're creating these no-go zones. Whether they are or not, I don't know. I haven't been there. Why would I go to Birmingham? So it's not going to happen.
No-go zone.
It's of course, I wouldn't. Yeah, exactly.
I didn't go to a no-go zone.
Right.
So it's like,
good point. So, and of course, Jess Phillips and all the usual leftists are going to say, oh, this is awful and appalling, and it's another diversion. Again, it's very similar. It's clumsy language. It's not ideal. It takes the focus off the real threat, the real problem, and it's very similar.
It feels like I don't know where it came from. It's an odd phrase, isn't it? It's got a sort of 70s tabloid ring to it or something. I assume it means the police have given up and have accepted that there is a sort of like Sharia law takes there or something like that. But I don't know if that's what it means. I've heard it said of parts of Paris.
Yeah.
which the police just don't go to because their police cars get set on fire.
But you're right, it's a bad phrase, because we could be having a conversation about integration, but instead we're having this conversation. When you read the way that it was phrased, it comes across more as not a no-go zone, a place he doesn't want to go, a don't want to go to zone, which is a different vibe.
Yeah. And it's all, we're losing sight of what the nature of the protests is that are happening every Saturday.
Yeah, and we've just seen that. Did you see the death threat against the Reform candidate who was called a white devil by a guy in a video? Did you see that? That's just come out today. But again, we're talking about this, and the left get to do pearl clutching and say, oh, it's so terrible.
Yeah, OK. Well, Steve, no problem with the supply side of the Islamo-Jewish tensions equation, according to The Sun.
Suppose, yeah. Small boat crossings surged past the 2,000 mark this year as Rishi Sunak faces pressure on illegal migration. It's a good job he didn't make this one of his 5 priorities or pledges or something like that and mention it in every single... one of his main rafts. Every single interview brings it up. A total of 209 people crossed the Channel in 5 dinghies on Sunday amid warmer weather. This could be the thing that gets some people to really be upset about climate change. Because warm weather this time of year, numbers are going to be an issue for them. The article then goes on to talk about the Rwanda plan, one that I always like to bring this up. In its current state, it would be you can send asylum seekers, which also seems like it should be the name of a band, like I'd like to teach the world to swim. You can send people to Rwanda, and the ones who would get sent back would be if they committed a crime. What a great filtration system to make sure we only get criminal asylum seekers. Yeah,
it couldn't be more dysfunctional, could it? It's never going to happen now. I mean, I tried to think the best of them, but even as a hideous deterrent, I think it's obviously failed, isn't it?
I'm thinking the absolute worst. I'm now thinking that that quote, the purpose of a system is what it does, Stafford Beer, I'm thinking they now just want the small boats to come over. We saw in France how quickly you can deport someone if you want to. I know there was a certain set of laws, reasons that law went through with the Tunisian imam. They deported him immediately.
And France is still part of the EU.
Yeah, right. Why is it so hard to do anything? I just think they want to.
Back to Wednesday night's problematic reordering of protocol in the House of Commons, Nick, and new evidence is emerging on that front as well.
This is a shocker. This is in The Independent. Speaker refuses to grant second Gaza debate as SNP demands investigation into Labour dirty tricks. But the main bulk of the piece is actually about Chris Bryant, who had this extraordinary interview with Cathy Newman. I mean, there's been extraordinary interviews with Cathy Newman before, and this was another. And he said, I think the whole day was grubby, and we need a system that doesn't allow people to manipulate the rules to be able to get what they want. And she goes, which you did. And he laughed and went, yeah, because you need rules to stop people like me doing bad things, is what he's saying. It's an extraordinary thing to say. He's saying that they used all the tricks, they filibustered or whatever, the Labour side. So he's admitting they did it. He's saying you need to bring in laws to stop people like me doing bad things, which I just find so extraordinary. So, and Hoyle has said he won't allow a requested emergency debate on Gaza because the government will bring forward a relevant statement tomorrow. But the whole thing is ugly. Hoyle needs to go. Labour have been terrible on this, and it's shocking.
I think it was interesting, wasn't it, the parliamentary procedure episode? I wasn't on that night, but to be absolutely honest with you, I still struggle a little bit to understand the nature of the protocol that was broken and so on, because it was so extraordinary, right? It was Opposition Day, but the government get to make the First Amendment, but then. I mean, it's a
if the government do an amendment, you're not allowed to have your amendment. That was a break. But no, it is quite.
But it has been explained enough times now that it definitely was distorted in order to protect MPs from legitimate and plausible threat of violence.
But if we were in general having a conversation and I said to you, like yesterday, you didn't stick to all of the rules in the House of Commons, you'd be like, why you get out of my Wetherspoons? But this particular thing is about setting a trap. And some parties were annoyed that the trap wasn't actually triggered in a way that it could have been... So, if they actually would have voted on it, Labour's amendment would have been voted down, so they would have got to vote on the SNP one, and everyone could have gone home happy, apart from the trap wasn't activated.
I think there is an element of truth to that.
Isn't it about Labour pressuring the Speaker, and isn't it about the violent threats and about that?
It's about all of that, Lindsay was definitely wrong.
It's about... But you're right, it's Chris Bryant and his ilk, and their utter cynicism are at least as much of a problem as the actual Islam's threats.
None of this was about trying to stop a war in the Middle East. This was about people playing...
That's not even on the table.
No, this is about people playing politics,
effect, isn't it?
and they're all upset that they didn't get to play politics.
You can almost
as much as
imagine the
others.
children of Gaza just standing there watching on their TV.
Well, I was writing recently saying as if Netanyahu's going to be saying, Labour, think what? What, the party that's known for anti-Semitism? I'll have a listen to them.
Mail now, Steve, very quickly, from the House of Commons to buildings full of rude, undisciplined ruffians and a handful of exasperated authority figures living in fear of their lives.
Yep,
See what I've
teachers.
done there?
Yeah, scared teachers are now locking the classrooms to keep violent pupils in there, one would imagine, or out, either way.
Yeah.
Well, I'd keep them in. They've done this wrong. They don't understand the prison system. In the old days, the parents and the teachers were both on the same side, and you would fear a parents' evening because the two forces got to meet. But now it seems the parents back the children, and that doesn't work because that phrase that it takes a village to raise a child, the village has to team up against the child.
Yeah.
And that's the only way to make this work. And I do think there's no threat. The threat is there's been an increase in the number of expulsions. Oh, you don't have to go to school anymore. It's not that much of a threat that you think it is.
And I think it's become a weaker threat because of the pandemic. I think that's broken the... It's broken the almost sacred principle that a child should be at school.
They say it clearly here. They say school was seen as a fundamental element of good parenting. Now it's seen as one of several often competing options. The only difference is they say pandemic, I say lockdown.
Yeah.
The lockdown showed school doesn't matter, and it's very the elites don't care about school. And now it's very hard for them to pretend it does again.
Do you want to remind me? We've all been stand-up comedians. I hate it when you go on stage at a comedy club and a previous act has allowed members of the public to stand on stage.
Yeah,
never do that. Never, ever do that. It's sacred. Right, we're at the halfway point. Coming up, charities provoking culture war. Is Charlotte Church provoking actual wars? And are either of them as outrageously offensive as the Celtic manager? Find out in 2 minutes' time.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Look, you're a respected royal biographer, and there are so many people who are on the sort of royal gravy train, if you will, people who are making a career out of gossip and speculation. But yours very much built on confidence and sources and facts. And you don't offer an opinion that often inside your book. But when you do, I suppose, therefore, it carries a bit more weight. So when you say that the Sussexes are easily offended and, you know, effectively pretty prickly, what do you mean and what have you based that on?
Well, on numerous... their riposte to any given situation in their books, in their TV interviews. And let's not forget, there have been a lot of TV interviews, 6-part Netflix drama, Spare. You see time and again that they feel they feel resentful. They feel that, you know, something hasn't gone their way and that this is part of some sort of calculated campaign against them. And actually, I mean, when you've got a fast-moving story, I mean, for example, in my book, I go into those frantic hours after the death of the Queen, and everybody's trying to sort themselves out. And Harry writes in his book Spare how you know, no one will return his calls, and he can't get through to anyone, and it's sort of it's just all a bit me. And actually, the whole kind of royal machine, if you like, is a team effort. And I just think it's very sad because, you know, Harry and Meghan, they had such potential. And now when we do tend to hear from them, on a royal matter, it's just to say how miserable they were being royal. And that was, you know, they were royal for whatever it was, 600-700 days. They're post-royal now for over twice that time.
Can you envisage a scenario where they're back in England and they're back in royal life?
I can't envisage a situation where they're back, as it were, as part of the sort of royal working unit, but I could certainly see it becoming a kind of normal thing for them to keep.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Where are we? I think I may have jumped ahead a couple of stories. OK, welcome back to Headliners. I'm sorry about that. I had the wrong story up, Nick. We are going to do culture war, first of all. It's an irregular noun, isn't it?
Yeah, so this is charities warned over fighting public battles around culture wars, and it comes from Orlando Fraser, KC, chairman of the Charities Commission. And he's saying that we live in a more and more atomised society with fewer universally shared values and norms than in past decades, and certainly less trust in institutions. Can't argue with any of that. No. I say that every night on here. Yeah. So his point is, he's saying, but when charities find themselves at the biting edge of what have been come to known as the culture wars, then there are problems. And he's absolutely right. And this might be an example of what a brilliant YouTube channel called Academic Agent calls putting the woke away. Are we now sort of slightly saying, let's tone down some of the more egregious examples of wokeness? This is what I'm taking from this. He's saying, charities, you're best off staying out of being too woke and just do charity stuff. Which
this is the chap that you've been interviewing, is that right?
It's coming out next Monday. I didn't want to plug it. But I
think it is interesting. I mean, I remember the first little bat squeak of trouble when Oxfam started, you know, to... they felt like they switched from raising money to campaigning against capitalism.
And in favour of natural disasters.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly culture war in that case. It was more like old-fashioned socialism. It was more like just too few people have too much of the money. But you can obviously imagine that there's a certain kind of individual gets attracted to the... what do they call it, the non-profit sector or whatever. And if you start to alienate the people who give the money, that's problematic, right?
Yeah. I mean, not only charities should stay in their lane. I don't even mean that in a patronising way. Could we just separate out the world? Products in general. Yeah. I'd love to eat an ice cream without having to care whether my ice cream is pro-Palestine.
Did you know that Haagen-Dazs has a hidden agenda?
Is it?
To include nuts?
It's a cryptic clue, crossword clue. It's got the word agenda in the middle of it.
Ah.
Haagen-Dazs.
This is great.
It's quite clever, isn't
it? That's pure Radio 4.
Took a turn, yeah. Well, but it's guilt by omission. It's the why aren't you signalling that virtue? Are you in favour of the bad side? Yeah. And that's why everyone feels like they have to.
Oh, yeah. That's why Taylor Swift, she was on the fence for so long, and then she eventually just came out as a lefty. But for ages, she maintained the silence. Like, is she endorsing Trump with her silence?
Yeah.
I always thought in 1994 or 5 or something, I got a job early on as a journalist on The Big Issue. And The Big Issue, of course, was launched to help homeless people raise a bit of money with honest graft by flogging a magazine. But you couldn't help noticing the editorial of that magazine was pretty hard left as well. And I did think, actually, if the idea is you're providing a magazine that Londoners generally want to read, making it quite divisive politically is probably a little bit, I don't know, it feels like I've given you me £1.30. Can I not just read some interesting stuff about London life generally, or does it all have to be...
I thought you were going to say, if you want to sell to the London market, you want to aim for people who are annoyed by homeless people. It's a difficult position for the market.
It's all about how great the EU is.
There's got to be a happy medium. Anyway, Daily Mail now, Steve. Charlotte Church claims she's not anti-Semitic, but it has to be said, with that surname, it presumably runs in the family.
Charlotte Synagogue is now as she will be known thenceforth, and she's cleared up this issue totally. Yeah, she insists that in no way is she anti-Semitic. She took part in a performance to raise awareness. I think the way she phrased it, raising awareness and money for the innocent babies caught up in the war in the Middle East. But, and here comes the big but, sang From the River to the Sea, and she's a good singer, which makes it worse. If I sing something you wouldn't even know I was singing. And she claims the controversial song is calling for a peaceful coexistence. At the very least, have a look at who else is singing your song right now and take some context from that. Like if loads of racists were singing Baby Shark, I'd probably stop, and that's a catchier tune. So the incident sparked fury online. Some people said that she's using her stardom to teach kids. This is the bit where I argue slightly. I don't know, it's harsh of me, but stardom? I know she's more famous than I am, but I'd forgotten about Charlotte Church.
A little bit. The trouble with From the River to the Sea is, if you are not a particularly curious or politically engaged person, it sounds a bit like Many Rivers to Cross or By the Rivers of Babylon. It sounds like an old, slightly biblical song updated to maybe a modern spiritual. And you don't necessarily... It's not like Throw the Jew Down the Well, is it? Do you know what I mean?
Well, let me answer this. Firstly, by the way, you mentioned her surname. Some people are calling her Charlotte Mosque online, which is a bit... I condemn, absolutely. But on this song, Yeah, it's at very least anti-Israel. Whether you believe it's calling for the eradication of Israel, or it's at very least not very pro-Israel. Like, we could agree on that. But a lot of celebrities are thinking of a time where you can just easily be on one side. You just take the most left-wing side and you win. But on this issue, you don't get an easy win. But what's fascinating to me is she says this. Charlotte Church says, "I'm fighting for the liberation of all people. I have a deep heart for all religions and all difference." The phrase "all difference" is borderline meaningless. Difference to who? And then she goes on. It was a beautiful, beautiful event. But unfortunately, the powers that be can't can't have such a powerful symbol of resistance. And again, one asks, against whom? And what she is trying to do is this kind of very interesting liberal 60s paradigm we're still stuck in. She wants to be part of some resistance against something, but something very vague and safe, so that she's always in the right. But that's just not an option anymore, and especially on this issue.
Yeah, why can't we all just get along?
She's also been a Welsh independence campaigner. So there is a chance when she sings From the River to the Sea, we're talking Severn and Irish.
It reminds me of when they say where the resistance, like in America, when they're just going with CNN and all the corporations, imagining they're resisting something. So she wants to vaguely resist something, but that's completely safe.
But, I mean, it is interesting. Only 20 years ago, there was the popular New Atheist movement, and writers I highly, greatly admire, like Christopher Hitchens, made a very strong case that religion is the source of all misery on the world, because when you have two clashing religions, they cannot just get together. But then in the meantime, in the last 20 years, we've seen what happens when what rushes into that vacuum, right?
Right.
The woke. A lot of people would say is what gushed into the vacuum that was left when people became actively atheists.
Absolutely, yeah, that definitely happens. But what is she resisting? If she's not resisting Israel, but she's resisting something, what is it? This is my question.
Yeah, gravity. Staying with women's issues now, Nick, and the Times have a story of sexist language used by the Celtic manager that I hesitate to repeat, even this late after the watershed.
Good girl.
I think he called her a girl. Is that right?
Yeah, shocking language. Rodgers condemned by women's groups after calling a reporter good girl. So Brendan Rodgers was annoyed after a game. He was doing a thing that football managers do quite a lot. They sort of create an imaginary enemy. He said the story has already been written about this group. Like, everyone's against us. They've written a story against us, but we'll write our own story. And she said to him, well, what do you mean? Because he was being all a bit sort of self-pitying and bitter. And he just was like, OK, done. Good girl, well done. So he was dismissive. Now, I don't particularly think it was necessarily sexist. I just think he was being rude to a reporter after a game because he was angry, which a lot of managers do. Yeah. It just happened to be a woman. Kind of like Chris Rock's old bit when he says if someone crashes into his car and they've got one arm, I'm going to talk about the arm. So there's going to be an element of her sex because,
That's what John Terry said, wasn't it, when he was in court over the foul abuse?
I have many ways of thinking about John Terry.
The first thing that comes to your head is whatever it is that you think is most likely to wound, but he's just trying to patronise.
Right, he is trying to be rude, yeah. And so, what do you
don't have to add anything to that if you...
No, I hate that I agree so much. You're right. It was someone being rude, and it just happened to land that gender. I know what's happening
with the right.
What's happened?
Red pill.
I want to know what Joey Barton says. Telegraph now, Steve. They are understandably delighted to be reporting on The Guardian getting battered for their dismal reporting by one of their own award-winning reporters.
Yeah, there's a Guardian writer boycotting the newspaper for failing to tell readers that the cat killer murderer was transgender.
Yeah.
It's Louise Tickle who makes a really good point. This doesn't even have to be getting riled up about trans issues. Write the story properly with the information. Newspapers are annoying for adding extra facts about people. By the second paragraph, you know their age. By the 10th paragraph, you might have the word leggy if you're in a tabloid. Yeah. At some point, this should crop up. And it was Scarlett Blake, described as the cat killer. Now, that's the other thing I would say. Killed someone and known as the cat killer. I think there's the two murders to focus on with the name.
I was confused because I remember Bin Lady. Do you remember Cat Bin Lady? This was about 2010, early days of Twitter, and there was CCTV footage of a middle-aged woman, an actual woman, who just walks past a cat that I think was maybe sitting on a wall, and she picked it up and chucked it in a wheelie bin and class. And the country was absolutely appalled, and it went on for weeks. But this
but she didn't go on to kill someone.
No, this woman did not just kill a cat. She live streamed disemboweling it, like putting it in a liquidizer or something. I mean, it was proper textbook. This woman is a psychopath.
And you're saying woman. The point here is the argument is it's a man. Because,
it was a man, yeah.
I mean, and so Louise Tickle, congratulations for doing this, sincerely. Though why weren't you boycotting The Guardian already? I mean, she says here that the newspaper is actively deceiving readers. I mean, that's practically the slogan of The Guardian.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and even Dominic Cummings has posted, I say even, the old media organisations constantly and deliberately lie to voters and customers. They're the biggest sources of misinformation. If you still trust them on anything political, you're a dope. I mean,
but the reality is, if the slogan trans men are men or trans women are women, if they are, the implication of that is that there is literally no. These are their rules, right?
Yeah.
It's going to skew the data. This is why we're seeing there will end up being more murderers who are women and a massive increase in prostate cancer.
There will, that's true. Film news now, Nick. Having already poisoned the minds of untold millions, Julie Andrews can no longer throw her filth at our Poppins kids.
Yes, shocking stuff. Mary Poppins' UK age rating raised to PG due to discriminatory language, which was the koi, who were referred to as Hottentot, which is now banned and not allowed. So it's gone up from a U to a PG, proving that history is not this linear cycle of progressivism. It's a back and forward, and we're going into the dark ages again. Are you allowed to say dark ages? Not sure.
Yeah, woke is a flat circle. Is Hottentot not? That's like slang, then, is it?
It's not used by Dutch settlers, the evil Dutch settlers, and it was imitating the language, in the sound of the language, hence it was offensive.
Oh, OK, like going honky for the French.
Yes, wouldn't do that on national television.
And then, so I read this story, and it took me about 3 hours to realise where else I know that word from.
3 hours?
Yeah. And it's Shakespeare's Sisters, I Don't Care.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Shakespeare. I was going to...
No, I don't. I'm more likely to... I work in local radio.
I don't care, says Hottentot.
There's a bit where they kind of speak in the middle of the song and say Hottentot a lot.
That'd be amazing if they got cancelled.
Yeah, let's make this happen.
At least get a parental advisory sticker on the CD.
What happens when you play Shakespeare's Sister backwards? Just the final section to come now, and this is where it gets intense. Female psychopaths, more of them, extinct men, and worst of all, the death of the high GSM business card. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
You have a president in President Biden who's not enforcing the law that was passed by Congress. President Obama, criticize him or not, actually enforced the law and was deporting people that had crossed illegally. Of course, President Trump enforced the law and improved the law to make sure that and worked with Mexico to have the Remain in Mexico policy. Biden has abandoned federal policy. In fact, he's deliberately trying to let in as many immigrants as possible. More for the Democrats, more is better and less is racist.
Just astonishing. And the statement that Greg Abbott put out is really feisty stuff. He said the federal government has broken the contract between the United States and the state of Texas. And the eye numbers, Greg, are simply eye-watering. 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years, Governor Abbott says. That's more than the population of 33 states in the United States. Astonishing numbers.
And Martin, that's just Texas. If you add Arizona and other border states, you know, it's pushing 10 million. By the end of Biden's term, it'll be 11 million. A study by Yale University a few weeks ago, 3 very liberal professors that did the study estimate there's 22 million illegal aliens. So this is a crisis that was created by Biden. It's what he wants. They want unfettered access to the border. They're letting them in. It's a real hardship on the working people of Texas and other border states. And now it's a real hardship on cities that the federal government, as well as the governors of Texas and other states, are sending some of the migrants to those so-called sanctuary cities.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome Welcome back to Headliner. So The Guardian now, Steve, they are claiming that women can be psychopaths too, though, given their definition of women earlier. That must be with caution.
Yeah, more women may be psychopaths than previously thought, says someone who's never dated. How are you just learning this now? Dr. Clive Boddy says the assessment skews towards men. The test was developed by analysing psychopaths in prison.
Right.
So male psychopaths who'd gone to prison and were kind of the prisonable psychopaths.
Yeah.
Whereas that way we lost nuance. It's not about being violent. It is, hang on, here's the definition. Psychopaths are generally considered to lack empathy and guilt, lie frequently, be ruthless, manipulative and seek control. Doesn't sound like any women I'm willing to talk about that I might have to travel home to later. And it reminds me of when the legal definition of coercive control came in.
Yeah.
And that was where a victim has to do what the abuser wants for fear of physical, financial or emotional distress. Happy wife, happy life is a phrase that people throw around, but effectively means this. So this stuff's been hiding out there. Some estimate that 23% of men are psychopaths, and that could be the same for women.
I suppose the key thing in most people's minds, it's, are you willing to embrace criminal activity in order to pursue your ends? Whereas I think a lot of people would recognise that women are at least as capable of men as being kind of low-key psychopaths, i.e. they will dissemble, deceive, use underhand tactics in order to get their way and feel utterly indifferent to any pain and discomfort that they've caused. As much as men, not like that. That's what women are like. That's just a human trait.
You sound like every divorced man.
But the question is, are men more capable of actually seeing that through to murder? And that's the point at which a psychopath becomes of interest to people rather than it just being a kind of, one end of a spectrum.
Yeah, you
know what I mean? Like
while.
disagreeable or something,
Yeah.
as Peterson would
They've
say.
said here, female psychopaths are more prone to expressing violence verbally. It's the mean girls thing.
Yeah.
We could have told that. And more subtly. They do it more subtly, but they wear you down verbally. Maybe they could get people to kill themselves by wearing them down. But like those AIs that were said to do that to vulnerable people.
There was that terrifying prospect, wasn't there, that they thought certain AIs would be able to talk you into killing yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm saying that's like women.
Yeah.
Apparently. I don't know why I've said that on national TV, but there it is.
Well, are they? Yeah.
I'm single, it's fine, no one cares.
The other thing that I think is would be interesting to look into is how often women do it that they're not aware of they're doing it because they're doing it for a third party's benefit, usually their children. I think a lot of single, childless women are not capable of psychopathy, but once their child starts to get bullied at school or is overlooked by the games department or whatever, that's when it becomes...
The protective urge.
Yeah,
I don't think
kind
that
of
would...
by proxy or whatever.
And all three of us, I just want to say, are scientists.
Yeah.
That wouldn't fit into the definition, though, because being a psychopath isn't a set of behaviours.
Munchausen psychopath.
Psychopath by proxy. But, no, I think the lack of empathy is a trait rather than a behaviour.
Yeah. Well, I remember John Ronson's book, The Psychopath Test, very interesting, and he essentially comes to the conclusion that it's very difficult to say for certain whether it's...
If they're real. The one thing that stuck with me was that one where they electrocute you, the electrocution test, and a psychopath won't anticipate the next little zap. He'll just be completely fine, whereas a normal person will, worry about it.
Yeah.
Leo curse levels of psychopath.
Metro News now, Nick, and Children of Men scenario eases ahead of the Handmaid's Tale again.
Yeah, it's the Y chromosome is vanishing. What will happen to men? So because of soy and endocrine disruptors, the Y chromosome, men are gradually being eradicated, and too much Guardian reading, and basically the Y chromosome has 55 genes compared to roughly 900 on the X. And so the problem is it's reducing, and they've estimated that over 166 million years that have been evolving separately, there's been a loss of about 5 genes per million years. At this rate, the last 55 genes will be gone in 11 million years. So no more men in 11 million years, in theory. However, I have to say, following my hero Jeff Goldblum, that life finds a way. So I think you'll probably be all right.
But that's parthenogenesis, wasn't it?
Well, then they say...
us,
you mentioned parthenogenesis. The Metro throws in an anti-Christian statement here. They say, we know virgin births or parthenogenesis is never going to happen. So that's a deliberate dig at Christianity.
Well, never means except in miraculous.
No, they mean they're having a dig. They're having a dig. They do point out it could happen because of some
I've got to give Stephen the science.
Yeah. Parthenogenesis doesn't happen in humans, does it? In turkeys. That's weird, isn't it? Reptiles, you'd accept.
I thought you were saying Turkey.
In Turkey all the time. That's what they're up to. This article makes some errors, saying that you start off by female, you develop into male, and it says in brackets, hence why men have nipples. No, that's for the clowns.
I remember that being a great chat-up line at sort of teenage parties, discussing why men have nipples. It was a great way of introducing a slightly salacious topic.
Different time.
The bigger question is, why do mannequins have nipples?
Yeah,
they definitely don't need them.
Why do they have navels?
They're huge.
Maybe that is where they're extruded from, though. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the theme. There's only 11 million years left, so how will we cope? But there is a bit in there that actually says...
It could all happen very quickly, though, couldn't it?
The sex-determining thing will be elsewhere in the chromosomal information. That there are species that don't have a Y chromosome, but they still have genders.
The mole vole.
Joking aside, what you said earlier is a far greater threat: endocrine disruption, collapsing sperm counts, testosterone and so on, or the desire to mate. I mean, that's going, isn't it?
I've got my second kid, so I'm potent.
Tinder news now, Steve, on that subject, and the Daily Star have further evidence that it's only sparking addiction rather than love affairs. Yeah.
So this is a quote. I had to get therapy for Tinder addiction. I was swiping on 500 women a day, which sounds worse than it is.
Swiping on the curtains afterwards.
Is that not too much? Is that not too much? Can you say that on telly?
Midnight. I must be able to get away with that.
Sure, like 5 a.m. something, isn't it?
Don't try on the blinds. Other things he could have done to make his wrist sore that would have been worse, I suppose. This 27-year-old Ed Turner says he was obsessively on Tinder. Basically, he just cries about, oh, no, I couldn't... Get out your room, grow up.
His name sounds like a mixture of Tinder and someone who swipes on things. Ed Turner, anyway.
That's brilliant. Well, that is the end of the show, appropriately enough. Let's take another quick look at Tuesday's front pages before we wrap up. The Times: I'm proof that Britain isn't racist, says Sunak, as somebody on Twitter pointed out, would be if he'd been elected or voted for. Telegraph: Army wives force MOD U-turn over housing. And Emma Barnett joins the Today programme. I discover that's what that picture is. Guardian: experts warn over Hunt over dubious case for unfunded budget tax cuts. Financial Times: Sweden clears last hurdle to join NATO as Putin's war shifts alliance borders. iNews: Hunt has 6 days to find tax cuts to save Tory MPs. And finally, the Daily Star: sing for your supper. And indeed to it, those were your front pages, and that's all we have time for. Thank you to my guests, Stephen Allen and Nick Dixon. I'll be back at 11 p.m. tomorrow with Stephen Allen and Scott Capurro. Thank you very much. Good night.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. It could be quite a cold and foggy start for some areas tomorrow morning. We'll also see some rain pushing in to the north